Hi, Evelyn, and welcome to When I Grow Up.
Hello. I'm glad to finally be here.
Yes, and I'm so happy to have you. I'm so excited about today's conversation, all about career change, which is a topic that's so close to my heart. And of course, both of us are executive coaches that work with people through their career changes. And we actually both also had really interesting career changes ourselves. And so this conversation is really for anyone that is considering a career change, that's going through a career change at the moment, or that has actually gone through one, but are finding it maybe hard to adapt or realizing that the reality is maybe a little bit different than what you expected before. So we're going to cover everything from what a career change is, what are some of the things you have to keep in mind when you're actually making the change, and also how do you kind of prepare yourself and have the right mindsets to make your career change a success. So again, thank you, Everlyn. And I think maybe to kick us off, it would be great as a backdrop to our conversation if you could briefly introduce yourself and give us a bit of a view on your own career journey.
So mine has been a very long career, and I realized that most of my decisions were based on things that I didn't want to do rather than things that I wanted to do. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just knew that I didn't want to be the famous five, as we call them: doctor, lawyer, engineer. So I went to business school. And then in your last year of business school, you're asked to choose a specific subject you want to deep dive into. I think they call it major in other countries. And there was a whole bunch of them. Again, I made my decision based on what I did want to do. So I did want to do finance, tax, and whatnot. So I went to HR. And then afterwards, when I was looking for a job, same thing happened. I got 3 offers, and I decided based on what I didn't want to do. So I landed in marketing, and thankfully I loved it. So for the past 10 years, I've been a marketer, both in Kenya, and then I moved to Dubai, where I did it for about 6 years, and I just left last year to become a coach. Now, coaching is the first one that I actually did based on what I wanted to do, not a choice based on what I didn't want to do.
So interesting. So it's really that decisions by order of elimination. So what was different this time, when you left marketing to make this career pivot into coaching? What happened? Can you give us a little bit of a view of what triggered that change?
So it's similar to many people's experience. So I did marketing for over 10 years. I loved it. But I think COVID and the mix of things, the way the industry is changing, so people have to do more roles compared to before. So you find that one person is doing up to 5 or 6 roles, what used to be done by 5 or 6 people. So then it got to a point where I faced burnout, which turned out to be a blessing. I know that sounds weird to say, but what it did is it pushed me to a career break. And during the break, it was about a 3-month break, I got the time to actually sit down and think about what I wanted. So what I did is I borrowed from what I was already doing. In marketing, you talk to a lot of consumers. You get to understand them, and you get to help them solve their problems through the product. So that led me to think about another career that I could do where you get to talk to someone, get to engage with them and understand what they're facing, and then guide them through it. So for me, coaching was very natural.
I think something that would be helpful for us to briefly touch on is the burnout. And, what does that look like in reality? And, for someone that hasn't experienced a burnout before.
That's a good one, because personally, I had no idea I was burnt out, because I thought this was very normal in the company. So I thought I was an outsider. In fact, for the longest time, I kept saying I was an outsider, because everyone seemed to be managing the environment pretty well, apart from me. So I realized at some point that I wasn't sleeping much. I was waking up at about 3 a.m. thinking about work, and then panic about it because I know that there's a lot to do. And I think the anticipation that the day is going to be tough, just based on your experience, makes it even harder to go to work. So I think the week I decided to take a career break, I was actually going to quit my job because I thought I don't belong here. I need to quit. So when I went in to talk to HR, they actually told me that something else might be going on. And they asked me to take sick leave. And during that period, I decided to talk to a therapist. And the first time they saw me, immediately they were like, you are going through burnout. That's exactly what you're going through. And so instead of a short period, they actually told me that I need to be out of work for 3 months. And that was very surprising to me because, you're ambitious, you're hardworking, you've managed a lot. So you think this can't happen to you. So I think that's one of the things you need to look out for. What's your mental health like? And you need to engage more people and talk about it, even to the company. Thankfully, my company was safe enough and you could go to HR, but you need to open up about it.
We have really somehow normalized, the chaos of, the world, the overwhelm. And in the corporate system, there's always on, there's always running, there's never getting ahead and on top of things. And so I think maybe just to encourage people. So you had that feeling that perhaps you don't belong and that triggered you to go speak to someone, which was your HR in your company. But I think if you're in a situation where you have this little voice inside telling you, perhaps I don't belong, or, perhaps it's time for a change, perhaps I want to change my relationship with work. I think once these questions start coming up in your mind, I wouldn't say it's necessarily the time to make a change, but it's definitely important that you take any of those signals really seriously, investigate them yourself. But it's often when you have a conversation with someone else, whether it be a friend, a colleague, HR, a coach, etc., where it helps you to get a different perspective on what might be going on. So thanks for sharing that story. Can I then ask, what is a career change then, if it is not only a complete shakeup? How do you define it?
There are a few things you need to consider whenever you're thinking of a change. Do you want to stay internal, like within your company? So if you want to stay within the company, do you want to change the role? Do you want to change departments and whatnot? And then there's the one that's external, where you want to leave the company, for example. Even when you leave the company, you have to consider, are you staying in the same industry? Are you going to a new industry? Are you changing how you work so it's more flexible? Is it going to remote? So basically, a career change is anything different from what you're used to at the moment, how you generally run your career.
And I would actually add to that, it is a career change is when you don't take the most immediate logical next step based on this historic paradigm of the linear career ladder path, so it's not going for that immediate promotion, doing exactly the same thing, but with a bit more responsibility. It's actually moving outside of that either role, company, team, and doing something quite different, but leveraging, of course, your strengths and everything that you've learned in the past. I love that you've brought in the internal career change perspective, because I think often people are so fed up in their job that they just want to run away from it, And so when we start talking about career change, and I think back to your earlier going or moving away from what you don't want to do, people start thinking of something completely different. But in my career, I've actually made a big internal career change when I was working for Accenture in consulting, because I was working on organizational change, so the kind of the people and change agenda, as a management consultant working directly with clients. And I realized at some point that I wasn't challenged anymore. I felt that there wasn't enough growth for me in the team. I didn't feel that the diversity of the work was really enough. So although the clients changed, the nature of the work stayed pretty much the same. And so I started looking internally what I could do differently. And I actually moved to the sales team, which is a completely different job day to day, but it was still leveraging some of that management consulting skills. But it was really elevating it to that CEO agenda and more a strategic level of working with companies to try and define what a transformation could look like. So the job day to day was completely different. It wasn't a different team. And I think important to mention, the culture of that team was also really different from the culture in the previous team that I was in. And I think sometimes if we feel there's a clash with a company culture, we think we need to completely change companies to go find something different. But I would encourage people to look internally, speak to people internally, and you might actually find your tribe just inside of the same company and keep a lot of stability in your life, but change the work that you do completely. So thank you for bringing up that option as well. So I wanted to touch on something around limiting beliefs around change. And I think so the one we've already mentioned there was this perception that change only comes in one shape and one form, where it could actually be many different things. Another one for me is that concept of the career ladder, and that, our careers are supposed to be linear and that every step should sort of logically follow on the next one. What are some of the other beliefs that you've encountered with, the people that you coach with that you think is important for people to be aware of?
I think the biggest that we always have to work through with the clients is the identity. When you've been in a job for a while, whether short period, long period, you start to identify with that place and that position and how they view you. Identity is always a big one. So you meet a client who, for example, is a senior manager somewhere, and some of the suggestions or some of the options they have, they don't go for those options because they think, I'm a senior manager, I can't ask for help. Or I'm a senior manager, I can't move backwards. Or I can't move to a job that has a different title. And I think it's linked to that idea that it needs to be linear. So anything that deviates from that feels very different. It actually becomes harder when someone is moving from employment to a business. There's a sense of identity and something that tells you that things should be done in a certain way. And anything different from that, it just makes the change very hard. I can give you an example. For me, the company I worked for was a very good company. So it did everything for us. There was an agent, in case your landlord gave you an issue, there was an agent for that. And for me, with the change, it was that identity shift that I am now someone who needs to deal with these issues directly. It was a very hard one for me. I felt like a rug had been pulled from underneath. So I think identity is one big one. I think the other one is that most people assume that the options are limited, that there's only one or two ways of doing things. And when they come into the session and we talk through it, they always become very surprised that they have more than one option. Again, it's linked to what you're talking about, that things are linear, and that includes finances. So you come to realize that with finances, you will have ups and downs and dips. But if you believe that it needs to go from one amount to the next, it can keep you in a job, because then you keep thinking that if I was earning X, it needs to go to Y. And if the next opportunity does not go to Y, I can't take it. And I always ask this question, that what if the company let you go today? What would you do? Because more often than not, when people are planning for a change, they assume that they will be the ones to make that decision.
I just wanted to emphasize that that is a brilliant question, because we get so stuck in all the confusion of the options and the possibilities and the limiting beliefs. Just to cut through all of that with the question of, if your company had to let you go today, what would you do? Now, what I take from that as well is something that I think is really common is, the one is this expectation. So the expectations that people have of you and that you have of yourself. And then that includes the identity piece, So let's use the consulting example again that I referred to earlier. So then I was becoming a change management expert, So then you get known for that internally, and in certain environments, especially corporate, consulting, etc., they always ask you in your performance reviews, what do you want to be known for, And you need to really start shaping a brand around your expertise and your value that you want to add. But then at some point, if you realize that, okay, now I actually feel like doing something different, that can be really confronting for yourself, because then you question, am I doing something wrong? Because now I've positioned myself as this expert and now I seem volatile wanting to do something different. But that can also be confusing for other people because they have put you in a certain box based off what you've done in the past. And so I think another limiting belief is from others' expectations, from this linear career path, expectation, etc. We put ourselves in a box so that we limit our next step based on what we've done in the past. And I think that question that you just shared around what you would do, if your company let you go tomorrow, that just opens it up to say, okay, so if we don't necessarily need to base the next step off what we're doing today, what is it that we want to be doing?
Actually, you've summarized it brilliantly because that's exactly it. And just linked to that, let me add something. Usually when we are in a safe environment, by safe, I just mean stable. And that is when you're in a company and you've been there for long. The other thing that most people do is that they don't engage externally. So you know the internal environment, everyone knows you, you're comfortable. So more often than not, when we meet and we talk about something like you need to go to networking events or be on LinkedIn or even see what's happening in the industry, I think that's the other thing that happens. It changes that identity and it makes a stable environment less stable when you need to consider what's happening out there. So that's one of the things we also work through because there's this idea that things should be a certain way. And when you go out there and talk to people and realize many people are doing things very differently.
Yeah, that's so important. And if you actually go into those engagements and that networking in a very curious way, you can also start feeling out, when you introduce yourself and now you know that you want to make a change. So you don't perhaps introduce yourself by your job title. You need to actually explain to people who you are, what it is that you're interested in, and what you would like to do as, that next step in your career. That really challenges you to start thinking differently, and you actually test it out, and I think in that first conversations, it can sometimes be a bit uncomfortable, but the more that you engage with people, the more clear you also become on how you want to go into the job market and what it is that you really actually care about, and you can authentically express that to people. That is a really good segue to where I wanted to go next. So it's all good and well we say to people, you've got all these options, don't limit yourself, don't box yourself in. And I think some people might find that to be very inspiring, but I think that might also scare some people, that feels quite overwhelming. Okay, great. So now the world's my oyster. How do I approach this? So what are some of the steps that you recommend to people when they are considering a career change? And what are some of the mindsets that they need to have throughout the process to make it a success?
In the very first session we always try to establish whether you want to move away from something or towards something. It's always a very big question that we need to answer. So you find that I'll use myself as an example. I realized that initially when I wanted to make a change before the break, remember when I went in wanting to quit, it wasn't because I was moving towards something, like a new job or something exciting. It's because I wanted to move away from the stress. And that is well and good. And it's something we talk about sometimes. If you are very aware that you're doing it and you're okay with it, that's fine. But in my case, I believe what would have happened is I would have left and felt the relief for about a week or so. And then a panic would have set in because now I don't have the stable job. I don't have a plan for what next. And the relief has worn off right? So we always try and establish that and try and move it to a point where you have a plan. There's something you're working towards, because that helps you sort of create a bubble around it, so you know what the fears are, what the challenges are, what the risks are with it. And that in itself already gives that sense of relief by the first session, because you know exactly what you want to do. That's what I would do first. I think the other thing we always try to establish is what your true fears are. I think when you are in corporate, sometimes we try not to engage so much with our emotions. So it's something we try and shut off. We always try to go into a session and try and establish what your fears are, whether they're unknown or those that you know. Is it finances? Is it the identity shift? Is it the fact that you don't know what your future will look like? We try and establish those and then work through them. And then there is the exit plan that we work through. What does it look like? How much do you need? By when do you need to do so? Do you even have the mental capacity for it? And for some people, it will be within 6 months they need to move out. For some, it will be within 1 year. In my case, it was actually 2 years. So I had to continue working for 2 years. But it was a very different mindset when I went back to work, because now I knew I had a plan. And I also knew that there were some things I no longer needed to do. I'll give you an example. When you want to get promoted in a marketing job or any other job, there's a huge aspect of visibility. So there are some tasks you do not because they drive the company goals, but because they make you more visible. I no longer had to do those tasks because I wasn't looking for promotion. And that gave me some time to invest into my exit plan. So those are the steps we normally take when a client comes in.
Yeah, you touch on something so important there that I think when you start thinking about a change, especially if it's something that's on your mind all the time, that can actually cause a lot of discontent when you go to work every day, but you feel like you don't want to be there. But it's so important to actually make that decision. And making a decision doesn't mean I need to go tomorrow or I need to, put in my resignation immediately. But if you make that decision, then you can work from that decision on that practical plan that you referred to. And whether it is then 6 months, a year, or 2 years, like it was in your case, at least you know what that kind of stick in the ground is that you're working towards. You know the steps that you need to take. And then very importantly, as you've explained well there, you can then redefine your relationship with the work in the meanwhile, and perhaps scale back or step back and not go full out. I think especially as women often tend to do, you don't have to overperform. You don't have to, gun for that promotion because you're not going to be there. But making that decision is so important. Otherwise, you just continue, I think, to add to the overwhelm. Another thing that you mentioned that I really just wanted to also put a little bit more emphasis on is around the finances. So I think the most typical way when people start thinking about a career change is that they either need to earn exactly the same salary, but actually more often than not, they think if they need a change in order to justify the change, they need to be making more. Like it has to be some sort of a step up, some sort of a progression for them to actually justify the change. And so a question I always like to ask is, okay, so what do you need on a month-by-month basis? What is the monthly income that you need to actually, cover your expenses and your lifestyle? And I think those are two things: to pay your bills and then all the nice to haves on top of that. And most of the time, 9 out of 10 times, people don't have that number, on the tip of their tongue. And so I think it's important to actually go take a step back and do that budgeting exercise, either by yourself or if you have a partner, do it together. But if you are super clear, this is what we need to pay the rent, this is what we need to pay our bills, and this is kind of the nice to have lifestyle things that we want to be able to afford on top of that, it makes your options so much more clear. You could then think of something like, if you want to take a job that pays less, but that will be more fulfilling, could you perhaps change where you're living to reduce your rent? I think when I say that to people, sometimes it's a bit like, oh, it's confronting. There's nothing wrong with that. We have downscaled from a house to a 1-bedroom at different, stages of your life, but that just helps you to open up the options. Alternatively, you could say, okay, we're going to continue doing things exactly the same, but, there might be some of the luxuries that we're willing to forego. Or what I've also seen in practice is sometimes we say the one partner is going to stick in their high-powered, high-paying job because they are happy to actually cover, the majority of the expenses, and the other partner can then, take on something different or take that career break and figure things out. It's not a short-term game, it's about our long-term fulfillment and our long-term happiness. And in that, you just need that information to be able to know what your options are. So just wanted to put some emphasis on that because I think that's a super practical thing that anyone could go do today to help them understand a bit better where they are.
And I think linked to that, there's a question I sometimes ask, and that's like, what does rock bottom look like in this case? And we go through that exercise because they think of the worst case scenario. Most people get very surprised when they realize that rock bottom is not that bad. Because I have one person who wanted to leave their job in Dubai still. And when we did that exercise, for them, rock bottom was they already had a home back in Kenya. They had their parents back in Kenya. So for them, rock bottom was moving back home, which was not as bad as they initially thought. So I think we always try and do that exercise for them to realize that my worst case scenario, first of all, is very unlikely. And secondly, is not as bad as I think it is.
Yeah, and I think even, you mentioned, you are, of course, from Kenya. This person's from Kenya. I'm from South Africa. I think we have all seen very, very bad worst case scenarios of what rock bottom can look like. And so I think that's always in the back of people's minds, something around not having pension, when you retire, what do you do if you don't have that savings, if you don't have a pension? What happens when you get fired without any kind of a social security and so on? But I think for a lot of us, then when we move abroad, it increases some of that social security in a way. If you have a career, you have experience, you have a network, it also means that if something happens, there's always options available to you. And I think we also shouldn't underestimate that just staying in a job, staying in a corporate job is also not necessarily secure. If we look at, the high level of layoffs happening in the world right now, and especially, for the folks in countries like, for example, in the US, where that can happen overnight, it's important to look more broadly at what security looks like for you. Again, does that sit in your skills? Does that sit in your strengths, in your networks, and in your backup plans, like you mentioned there, moving back home, moving back in with your parents, whatever the case might be. There's one topic we haven't touched on yet, which I think is super important to discuss when it comes to career change and how to enable a career change. And that is the topic of your transferable strengths and everything that you take with you. It's not necessarily a hard skill that you learned in university or necessarily on your job, but it's the things that you are inherently good at as a person, whether it just comes naturally, it's something that gives you energy, etc. So I love the Clifton strengths for that one, but there's many different ways in which you can identify that. And I think that is, for me, the biggest key unlock when you're thinking about a career change and thinking about your options.
I think when you decide to leave, it's also a very good time to do research about yourself. So I used to like asking people what my strengths are or what they say I'm really good at. And that gave me information that I could use in interviews and anything else I wanted to do in the future. So I think that's a big one. I think you need to start documenting the things you do well. So some of the achievements you currently have within the company, and some of the, when someone tells you you're good at something, like that was really good, you need to document those things because it's data. The one thing I'd look out for is not equating the performance rating to how good you are externally, because the performance rating is usually very subjective. It is linked to many other things. So you meet someone who's good at something, but because the rating wasn't as good, they think they're not good at that. So I think that's the only lookout we talk about whenever we're talking about the skills. People tend to see themselves the way other people see them. But what if the wrong person is seeing you? Or what if the person seeing you does not have your best interest? Does that mean you're not that thing anymore? So it's one thing we always look out for when it comes to looking at your strengths and your skills.
I love that you shared that. That is so important. Take those external data points, but then bring it back to yourself and actually go do that investigation yourself and trust yourself more than anyone else because you know yourself the best. And I think, the way that we've set up performance feedback, and I think there's a whole other episode on that, so I actually won't go on a rant, but
Yes.
it's more opinion than it is actually factual. Based on who you are as a person, what are you doing well, and where might you grow? More often than not, it's a manager's opinion of you, and that can either be helpful or it can be completely unhelpful. So yes, take it as a data point, but trust yourself more than anything else. So we're coming to the end of our conversation, Everlyn. I just wanted to check in with you whether there's anything we haven't touched on yet that you feel is really important to share with people.
I think whenever you're making a change, a shift in your career, visibility is very important. Not just visibility, but also giving it your best shot. We do meet a lot of people who haven't filled in their LinkedIn or their CV was last updated a while back, so it doesn't have the latest skills and what they do well. And I think it's good to give it some time and work on that. And not just click easy apply on LinkedIn. Actually take them time to apply, follow up, get to know people. Because I did mention something about sometimes we view ourselves the way other people view us. And we forget that externally, that person does not know you. You still have to build some form of visibility and you need to gain their trust.
Yeah, I think that best shot is such a good way to put it, because when it comes to a career change, the traditional approach of just, sending in a CV or doing the easy apply, as you mentioned, is most likely not going to work because, these days we obviously scan the CVs really fast. It's all automated. And so if you don't have a profile that exactly matches what they're searching for, you might not even make it through to the first interview. And that can be really discouraging. But so for me, part of giving it your best shot is knowing that you're going to have to go the extra mile here. And part of that is really engaging with people. So individuals, people hire people. So make sure that, you are really clear on what it is that you want to do next. Make sure that you're really clear on what type of company, what type of team you want to be a part of, and reach out to those people and engage with them. And then make sure, like you said, that you can actually explain to them who you are, what it is that you want to do, and what is it that you will bring to the table. And I think there, if you have a different profile, in a lot of cases, that's actually bringing value to the team, because it's not just adding a person with the same skill sets. You are actually augmenting the team and bringing something different. And that can be a huge strength. I just wanted to touch on briefly the role of a coach and how they can help you in the career transition. You've already mentioned earlier some of the things that you do in your sessions. When should someone know to look out for a coach, and what would the value of that be?
A very common sentence I get when people first reach out is, I am stuck or I feel stuck. It's always the sentence that people write to me. I think that should be the first indicator. You've thought about the change and you've thought about it for a while, but you just feel stuck. Sometimes, or more often than not, it's good to have outside perspective, because a coach will not only give you clarity, they also give you the confidence to move forward. Now, when you come to the session, we don't usually, as coaches, tell you what to do. We just guide you through it. Think of a car and GPS. It won't tell you where you need to go, but when you know where you want to go, it gives you the directions to that place. So that's what we do in a coaching session. I can give you 2 examples on clarity and on confidence. I did have a client who came in and she was looking through jobs, her ideal jobs, and she didn't think that she was 100% qualified for most of them. She was about 60%. So we decided to go for it. And when we talked through it, we realized that leadership was one of the biggest reasons she wasn't applying to these jobs. And for her, leadership meant that she had people reporting under her. That was her idea of leadership. But this person was managing interns. She was managing the mentorship program. She was in charge of agencies, actually multiple agencies. And yet she didn't think she was a leader. So I think that's what a coach does. We go through this limiting beliefs that we mentioned earlier, but also the gaps that you see. And with the gaps, we either decide that it's something you can work through or it's a mindset shift that needs to happen. So I think that's the one I've seen when it comes to confidence. When it comes to clarity, it's the kind of work we do where we look at what does rock bottom look like? What do you want to do next? Is it within? Is it outside? And even outside, is it a different industry you want to go through? So a coach will just help you think through all these options and then hold your hand as you go through it. Because like you said, career changes can destabilize you a bit, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't move forward with them. It just means that sometimes you need help from someone who either has been through it or knows the right tools to help you through the process.
Yeah, exactly. You've absolutely nailed it. I think it's about that clarity on what do you want, how you're going to get there. It is that confidence piece. It's almost holding up a mirror, helping you to really see who you are and what you're capable of. And then I would just add to that the accountability side of things, which I find super helpful is, if you've got that plan, you've got that goal for yourself, it's keeping you accountable and being kind of, I refer to myself as a wing woman, two women in business. And I think that's pretty much what a coach is, it's being your wing woman or your wing person and keeping you accountable to make the progress or to reach the goal that you've set for yourself. Thanks so much, Everlyn. This was a wonderful conversation. I think we could definitely do actually a series on career change, but this was just a brief introduction to people on what it is, what to expect, and some of the practical steps that they can make if they're considering a career change or going through a career change. I'll share Everlyn's details in the description and in the comments. You can reach her on LinkedIn. You can also reach me on LinkedIn. I've also got a career change masterclass that I've just launched if that's something that you want to do more self-guided. But I would always recommend as a first step, if you're considering a change, reach out to either Everlyn or myself, because that conversation in itself is so helpful. That first conversation, and we both will do a free consultation with you.
Yes.
That first conversation is so helpful to really just reflect on where you are, where you want to go, and what the best mode of support from a coach could look like to move you forward.
Thank you for having me. It was a very good conversation, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
It's my pleasure. Goodbye.